Have you ever wondered why anxiety exists? What's the purpose of anxiety? Watch today's video where I really start to help you decode the roots of anxiety, why we even struggle with it. Hey there, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed therapist in Florida and owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. Hit that subscribe button now to get more tips to handle your anxiety, improve your relationships, and just overall work on yourself. All right, let's jump into this week's video. So I've been doing this series on decoding anxiety. If you missed the first video, go check it out here because that's really where I just start to talk about what is anxiety. So for today's video, video number 2, I really want to start to talk about what is the purpose of anxiety? Why do we even have anxiety? Okay, so it's helpful to understand when I went through the first video, I really distinguished the difference between anxiety and fear, things like that. But it's really helpful to know that not all anxiety is bad, right? Anxiety can be really helpful. I know. You might be telling me no, heck no, I don't want my anxiety. You can take it away 100%. I get it. I don't want to minimize your experience with anxiety because I know it feels really, really uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's hard to be with when it knocks on the door. But it's helpful to understand that there is a purpose and reason it's there. So it's helpful to know that when we think of anxiety, pretty much what it is, it's this making sure you stay alive. It's kind of this better safe than sorry mechanism that I read in one of Dr. Tersh's books. So what's helpful to think about it, it's all right, if you think about you are crossing the street and you hear an oncoming car, you are going to have an anxious immediate response that's going to propel you to get out of the way. That anxious response, that fight or flight response that's being activated, that's what's helping you stay alive, right? So in times, anxiety is really helpful to keep you alive. So a lot of times when I tell clients, when they say they never want to have anxiety, knowing that also means the trade-off is that you're going to lose that internal alarm system, right? Because at times that's what it is. The second part, it's also, I like to kind of really point out this graph here, this bell-shaped graph. You might have seen it before that really talks about not all anxiety is bad. So if you look here, the correlation, the relationship between anxiety and performance, no anxiety or stress about an upcoming task isn't helpful. It's not going to help your performance. And just think about this, whether at work or when you were in college, think about someone you knew that's just super chill, doesn't care, doesn't stress out about things. And unless they're just naturally a genius, which there are some people out there, they don't really do that well, or they don't do as well as they could, right? Because there is no kind of internal stress or anxiety that's propelling them to try to learn or study or prepare for this task. So some anxiety, if we can channel it into helpful energy to help us prepare, does help us, again, boost up our ability to prepare for whatever task it is, whether it's an exam, studying, whether it's a presentation, right? Getting in the weeds and sitting down and doing the grunt work that you have to do. Now, as you also can see here, too much anxiety is not helpful for your performance either, right? If you start to overthink or you get too anxious or you struggle with panic attacks. I see it often with people they have an upcoming final or they have an upcoming presentation and they start having panic attacks before that. That's not going to be helpful, obviously, for your ability to prepare or perform. So it's really kind of trying to find that sweet spot, which might be different for every single person. I want you to think about, comment below if you can think of one instance, just once in your entire life that anxiety has actually been really helpful for you. Whether it's helping you overpack and over prepare, check everything off before a trip. And then you realized, wow, when you were at this trip with your friends forgot a toothbrush and you had an extra toothbrush you could share. Whatever the case is, something silly like that. Or whether it is preparing for a work presentation and you really went above and beyond and then you got asked this question that none of your colleagues knew, but you knew because you did some extra prep. So just think about one situation, comment below one situation where you can think of that your anxiety was actually helpful for you. Okay, so now that you can really identify at least one instance that anxiety has been helpful in your life, I want to really then back up and help you understand, from an evolutionary perspective, why do we even have anxiety? What's the purpose for our species, right? Because I talked about this better safe than sorry individually, but it's this internal alarm system to preparing you danger, threat. But it's also thinking about from an early age, right? Thinking about our ancestors. I give this example that, okay, let's say you had 2 cavemen out in the wild, right? One caveman, Bob, he's pretty chill, right? He's like the guy that doesn't prepare for the final, right? No stress, right? Pretty easygoing. And then there's Frank, who's the opposite. Frank is a little bit more type A little bit anal, a little stressed out, right? He's constantly checking, making sure that there's no danger out in the horizon. So, okay, you have Bob and Frank. Bob, so these two cavemen, every single morning, they leave their cave and they look out on the horizon and decide, like, is today a good day to go out hunting for the tribe? So they both see the same thing, right? They see something faintly in the distance, and Bob's like, oh, no, that's just a berry. That's just a berry bush. No worries. We're fine. We can go. Whereas Frank sees that, and Frank's like, no, dude, that's definitely a saber-toothed tiger. So Frank's like, nah, I'm good. I'm going to stay home. Bob's like, no, it's really no issues. Like, it's fine. Fine. I'll go by myself. So here's the thing, right? They see the same thing. They have two different interpretations. Bob, though, he goes on his merry little way to go hunting for the tribe. And this is the crucial distinction. He is right 99% of the time. So 99% of the time he goes out, and he's right. There's like, oh, it's just a bush. No, he's just like stressing out, does the hunting, comes back. The tribe's like, oh, you're awesome, Frank. Whereas Bob here, he like went to like a local tree pretty close by. He's picking apples for the family and the tribe. And he's just like, oh, okay, great. So, but that 1%, and this is really important, right? This process keeps happening. There's a 1% chance that they have the same interpretation. And then when Bob goes out, he doesn't return, because that time Frank was actually right. It was some type of predator out there ready to attack. And so he doesn't return. And so it's helpful to keep in mind, we kind of descended from the Franks of the world, right? We descended from that anxious, be careful, hyper aware, because those are the ones that survived, right? That innate, constantly being alert to make sure that us and the species will go on. So it kind of reminds me of this movie I said, The Croods, a couple years ago. Grug in there, that's pretty accurate representation of like the Franks, right? He's like highly stressed. He's like trying to make sure, whereas the daughter is more like Bob. And it's like, it's okay, it's fine. But like Grug, right? Like his anxiety, his like making sure they're okay is what's kept his family alive. So when you think of that perspective and you understand from an evolutionary perspective that our minds are also wired and our bodies are wired in a way to always be like detecting for any potential threats, that's another reason why we have anxiety. The difference is that our mind and bodies evolved from a much different landscape than where we currently live, right? For the most part, most of us aren't living in societies where, we're hunting or there's predators, right? We live in a much different society, but our minds then perceives like present date threats as if they were the saber-toothed tigers and still has that flight or flight response, right? So our mind really like hasn't caught up, hasn't evolved to like the current landscape with kind of the threats that we experience nowadays. So when you have that in mind, you then know that at times when you're having the anxious response, that like internal alarm is telling you something's wrong, you need to know and be able to distinguish when it's valid and when it isn't, right? Because sometimes with anxiety, what starts to happen, that response goes a little haywire, right? We interpret things as threats that aren't really threats, right? If I do bad on this presentation, like I'm not going to die, right? I'm not going to be ousted from the tribe, although my mind might think that, right? And so in that moment, though, I still might see that as a threat and I'm having that anxious response. So sometimes that anxious response, again, just goes a little bit into overdrive. So we need to be able to distinguish the difference. I hope now you guys have a better understanding of like the roots and the purpose from an evolutionary perspective of your anxiety. So next time it shows up, you can really start to catch yourself and saying like, oh man, is that really a saber tooth? Probably not, right? How valid or accurate is this threat? Either way, I encourage you to go watch this third video in this series so you continue to understand more about your anxiety so then you can overcome it. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that means for you. Thanks, guys.